Campus Conversation with Richard and Jan Lariviere. Most of you have probably been in one or another of the 743 different meetings in which they have already participated on this campus. There are only 692 to go after this one. We call in higher education these kinds of selection processes trial by ordeal, and you are participating in this morning. I'm George Pernsteiner. I'm the Chancellor of the University System. Following this discussion and all other discussions which you may have with Richard, I would really appreciate it if you would send me an email of your comments, observations, and recommendations to newpres@uoregon.edu. I need those by noon tomorrow in order to be able to compile a recommendation which I will make to the State Board of Higher Education on Friday. So I really would appreciate your comments and your recommendations by noon tomorrow. Tim Black, who has kept me honest throughout this entire process, has said that I have to tell you that again at the end. So you will hear it again. This is, I guess, a time-honored pedagogical technique. But of course, in my classes, I tend to say things 3 times. And since I won't have another opportunity until the very end, I will do it twice in the front. Please send me comments at newpres, N-E-W-P-R-E-S, @uoregon.edu by noon tomorrow. I want to take the opportunity now to thank the members of the search committee. They, all 25 of them, devoted probably more of their lives than they thought they could possibly give up to trying to find the right person to succeed Dave Frohnmeyer as a successful president of the University of Oregon. I would like all of you to extend your thanks to the search committee. I think they did a marvelous job. You all know by now the background of Richard Lariviere. From humble beginnings to executive vice chancellor and provost at the University of Kansas. But of course, that's only the past. It's prologue to, I think, a very successful engagement as the next president of the University of Oregon. And at this point, I'd like to give Richard an opportunity to share with you some of his thoughts about himself, about his wife Jan, about his engagement with higher education, with the life of the mind, with universities in a public context, and with the University of Oregon. So Richard, if you please.
Thank you very much. Thank you, George, for that introduction. Let me ask my wife, Jan, to stand so that you can sympathize with her. So I've been asked to talk about myself, my favorite topic. Actually, I'm not going to do that very much because my guess is that there's plenty of information about my career and so on available to you, resumes and CVs and so on. This probably isn't the right venue to make this confession, but something's been eating at me that I need to get off my chest. When I sent my CV to the University of Oregon to apply for this job, I scoured it and updated it and did all of the things that we all are accustomed to doing. Except I neglected to put my Kansas telephone number down, and it's still the Austin, Texas phone number. So I'd like to publicly apologize to the Smith family, whoever they may be. Well, it's a real honor and a pleasure to be here. We have had, Jan and I have had a pretty full schedule thus far, and people keep sort of tentatively apologizing for the intensity and the length of the days. And I have to confess that it has been great fun, really energizing and frankly encouraging. I have not felt an ounce of fatigue or boredom or stealing looks at clocks or watches. It has been really exciting to engage this community, and we've just scratched the surface. My sense of the University of Oregon before I applied for this has been confirmed by my interaction with the community thus far, and that is that this is a place that has, as I have said in other contexts, been on a bread and water diet from the state for a very long time and managed to build muscle mass in spite of that. That is really enviable. This is one of the great research and teaching institutions in the world, one of the leading institutions in the United States, and you've done it on a shoestring, and it's really amazing. One of the things that I hope to be able to do as president here is figure out ways for the university to have greater control over its destiny and to figure out creative ways to fund higher education, public higher education, that I think could turn out to be actually models for the rest of the country. There are odd turns of events. 6 months ago, the notion of receiving only 12.6% of your operating budget from the state was a pretty dismal prospect. Now, in fact, that may turn out to be a competitive advantage, because a 10 or 20 or 30 or 40% cut of a 12% budget is far more manageable than a similar sized cut of a 30% budget. And the university, I think this university is going to come out of this downturn, if we manage it properly, it's going to come out of this downturn in a competitively at a greater advantage than we went into it. We'll see how that turns out, but that's my instinct at this point. One of the temptations of any academic when you put a microphone in front of them is to gas on endlessly until everybody starts to nod off. I'm susceptible to that, I warn you, to that temptation, but I try to resist it as aggressively as possible. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stop at this point, because I want to have a conversation with you. I want to hear what's on your minds. I want to be able to respond to any questions or concerns that you may have. And as I always do at this point, I will remind you that we should endure the next 10 seconds of embarrassed silence as you muster the courage to be the first one to speak.
Those who are courageous, those for whom the future is one of audacity and hope. Please go to one of the microphones in the center and begin the question.
Well, I don't think I'm full of audacity. I think I'm actually kind of a sucker. But let me get started. My name is Peter Gilkey. I'm in the mathematics department. And I don't really need that. My question to you is, the University of Oregon has a long tradition of shared governance and creative and productive engagement with the administration, as opposed to sometimes some of the sterile confrontation we see at some of our sister institutions in OUS. And are you familiar and do you welcome, this is an easy question, such an engagement?
Can I get back to you on that? Well, actually, Peter and I have already had this conversation, so that's a thinly veiled softball, but thank you, Peter. For me, shared governance is part of the way universities work. The so-called corporate models and so on that one hears talked about on universities are just don't work in these communities. And And that's not, for me at least, that's not just lip service to existing structures. It has always struck me in those environments where I have been, and I have been in environments where rather than shared governance, I would say it was more of a parallel governance, parallel universes. It's always struck me as incredibly wasteful because we spend inordinate amounts of energy and time and money attracting the smartest and most dynamic people that we can possibly find for any one of the job openings that come open here at a place like this. And to not harness that talent for the administration of the community strikes me as the height of folly. Implicit also in the sort of parallel rather than shared governance is the notion that all of the ideas will come from a small group of people who are responsible for the administration of the place. And I'm here to tell you that is really the height of folly. If you're expecting me to have all the ideas, you got the wrong guy. Because I'll have some ideas, almost all of which will be brilliant and effective. But I'm not going to have all the ideas. This is the nature of the problems that we face at this institution, but also in these institutions in general, is going to require all of the creativity that we can possibly wring out of ourselves to address. And that means we have to have effective means of communicating those ideas, of collecting them, of gathering them, of vetting them, and eventually bringing them into being. And the only way that I know of, the only environment in which I've ever seen that done effectively at an institution is with a robust shared governance, where the faculty and staff and students can all be at the table and responding to the vicissitudes that confront the institution. So I'm a fan of shared governance. Not least because if it turns out to be a bad idea and didn't work, it'll be yours and not mine. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Lynn Steven. I'm a professor of anthropology and ethnic studies and director of the proposed Center for Latino, Latina, and Latin American Research. I'm sure you're aware of the rapidly changing demographics in the country. In 2050, children who are now called minorities, people of color, will be a majority in the country. The state of Oregon, like the state of Kansas, has been changing quite rapidly. And as you know, Texas is a state that has, for a long time, had a very diverse population. In Oregon here, in another 12 years, 28% of our high school graduates, public high school graduates, will be Latino students.
In how many years?
12.
12.
Yeah, approximately. So about a third of the folks that we're trying to bring into our university are Latino and other students of color. So this is still a primarily white institution with white faculty. And I'm wondering what your ideas are for preparing the University of Oregon from maybe being 10 or 20 years behind to deal with the demographic reality that we already have in the state and the country, and particularly for recruiting and retaining Latino students and other first-generation folks who haven't gone to college.
That's a really good question. Thank you. You're right. The parallels between Kansas and Oregon were a real surprise to me in this regard. Both states are essentially facing a somewhere between 8 and 10 year relatively steady decline in the number of high school graduates. And it's the only segment of subsegment of the demography that's growing in any significant way is the Hispanic community. And it's also the case that both states are just roughly over this next 10 to 15 year period trading out one white student for a Hispanic student in the mix, because at the end of that period there will be roughly the same number of high school graduates as there was at the beginning, but there will be a very different constitution of them. You're right. I spent 24 years in a state that had assiduously avoided engaging this question throughout most of its history. And in the arena of education, the consequences are and will be for a very long time really ominous for that state. Kansas, when I came to Kansas, I looked at these very demographic facts that you talked about and pleaded with my colleagues there to not make the mistake that other states had made and get in front of this as aggressively as possible. I learned very quickly that while there was a lot of sympathy for that idea, nobody had any idea what to do about it. So I went to some really savvy political leaders in the Latino community in Kansas and had them help me identify community leaders throughout the state. Because as I'm sure you know from your interests, this is not a homogeneous community. It's as diverse as any other subset of the community. And we identified 20 leaders of various aspects of the Latino community and asked them to give us the name of someone who would serve on what we ended up calling the Latino Vision Council. And we summoned these people to the campus 3 times and asked them to tell us what it was that the university should be doing to engage this community successfully in such a way that the children of this community would avail themselves of higher education opportunities. And what we did was I think, fairly important, particularly in the first meeting. We had it in a room where we could get these 20 people around a single table and also bring into that room all of the people who would be impacted by what it was they had to say. So admissions, student success people, financial aid people, people developing the university's web presence, public relations, representatives of key undergraduate colleges. But I had them all sit around the outside of the room, and they were all instructed on pain of death not to speak. Because what I did not want to happen is what almost always happens at university gatherings, is that those of us who make our living giving voice to our opinions and our ideas tend to take over. And we literally sat in stony silence for much longer than the embarrassed 10 seconds that I referred to here, because I pleaded with the Latino representatives of the Latino community to tell us what was on their mind. And it was painful and awkward and absolutely the right thing to do, because eventually over the course of that afternoon they opened up and began to tell us stuff that was very unpleasant to hear, very painful, very awkward for them to reveal to us, and enormously valuable to the institution. We did this, as I said, 3 times. They came up at the end of that process with a list of, I think, 10 or 12 suggestions that the university should engage in, and we're in the process of implementing those and making considerable progress. Now, having congratulated myself for this exercise, I will tell you that there's really only one metric for success in this regard, and that is the successful graduation of those students in significant numbers. It's not enough to attract them to the campus. It's not enough to induce them to avail themselves of some financial aid opportunities that may be there. You have to graduate them. And we're too early in the process for me to tell you how successful we are yet. But what we have done, I think, and I think I can say this without being too immodest, I think we have established a level of trust and confidence that wasn't there before in the institution. This community didn't feel like this was their place. They're still a little shaky on that and waiting to see how well we deliver, and that's why the follow-through is so important. This is a really important issue, and one that we will have to engage aggressively here. not just for the sake of this institution, and it's very good for this institution, but as part of our obligation to the people of the state of Oregon. Yes, sir.
Hi there. My name is AJ Eaton. I'm a sophomore at this school. And this year I also have the privilege of serving as the Residence Hall Association president. Students on this campus place a high value on the creation of opportunities for their input, especially in regards to plans and policies that are implemented by the administration. And there have been times in the past when students feel that there weren't enough of these opportunities created and that their voices were not heard. How do you plan on creating an administration that is transparent and that makes students feel as if their opinion matters?
Well, I don't know all of the vectors of communication between student organizations and the president's office yet, but I have had occasion to meet with students both in this visit and in a previous visit, and I must say I'm pretty impressed. I've been impressed by a lot of things here, but I'm really impressed with the level of organization and the sophistication of those organizations among students here. It's unusual for its sophistication. My intention is to take the fullest possible advantage of that, both to get your ideas, but also to explain why certain decisions have been made. The easy decisions, the decisions that make you happy, aren't the ones that need explanation. It's the hard decisions, the unpleasant decisions that need the explanation. And that's the real test of channels of communication. If the only time you talk to me is when you're happy with me, or if I talk to you and I've got good news for you, it'll be fun, but it won't be very valuable. We need to be able to talk to one another when there's deep and genuine disagreement and give voice to those disagreements. I'll always be right, of course, but at least we'll communicate. No, I'm just joking. He hastened to add. Yes, ma'am.
And I'm a development officer. I'd like to hear more about your experience with fundraising and advancement and what you have as some ideas of critical components to a successful advancement organization. What your ideas about what you might bring to the University of Oregon.
Well, I was integrally involved at every stage of the campaign at Texas that targeted $1 billion and ended up raising $1.6 billion. And in the course of that campaign, which lasted just over 7 years, I guess, we had 3 presidents and 3 directors of development. So I know all of the pathologies of campaigns very well. And oddly enough, that's probably a more valuable experience than a campaign that just goes like this one apparently did, like clockwork. One of the liabilities that we have in public higher education is that we have not made yet part of our DNA the consciousness of how important development is. There are still universities that will have a campaign, hit their goal, and then dismantle their development operation and bring it back down in the interest of economy to something smaller. That is a terrible mistake, because the truth of the matter is that these institutions, these great research and teaching engines, have to have big, well-staffed professional development campaigns going on all the time. And I'm delighted by the team that I have met and the plans that I've seen and the ambition that I've seen here. This is really, really strong. Stronger than, I dare say, stronger than most people outside the profession would understand. My expectation is that I will have to get to spend a lot of time in development, and I love doing it. Because every nickel you raise gets put to work very effectively at a place like this. And the story that you have to tell is wonderful. There is almost no human being on earth for whom we don't have something going on here that resonates with them. There are a few, but not many. And it's great fun showing them the stellar research, the exciting teaching, the transformative magic that happens to every student that comes on this campus. And telling that story is great, great fun. I love to do it. I might even do it if there weren't donations at the end, but the fact that there often are is really great. Yeah. And the exact amount that I have raised is somewhere around $200 million as a dean of the School of Liberal Arts at the University of Texas. I don't have the exact numbers, but it's somewhere around that amount. Yes, sir.
I have a question about a burning issue, and that is the fate of Sanskrit. I'm a professor of history.
Finally.
Yes. Well, I'm going to hold you to this. I'm a professor of history. I knew your work on Dharma Shastra before I even knew that you were an administrator.
You see, I told you, this is a really impressive faculty.
My question is this. You're quoted in the Register Guard this morning as saying that the humanities will not die, something to that effect. And indeed, all of us find it hard to imagine that a millennia-old tradition could either come to an end or wither into insignificance. And yet some would say that's exactly what happened with the Sanskritic tradition when Europeans arrived and began prizing practical, utilitarian, scientific knowledge. So my question is, how would you draw upon your lessons from your days as a Sanskritist, and I understand you're an ongoing contributor to that field, in order to confront the so-called crisis of the humanities in our own times?
Boy, that might be the best question anybody's asked me so far. Boy, that is really provocative. That's great. I'm not sure that it's a fair characterization to say that the Sanskrit tradition died or met the beginning of its demise with the arrival of the Europeans in South Asia. It continued pretty robustly for an additional 100 years. But it is true that it did not die. It's never died, but it has become moribund effectively. And it's very hard to find a traditionally trained pundit now who's under the age of 85. There are some, but not very many. And they tend not to be scholars, but rather just repositories of the tradition. I think that a lot of the responsibility for that, and I'm kind of making this up because I've never really thought about it in these terms, but I think a lot of the responsibility for that lies with the Hindu community that ceased to value this learning. Pundits, traditional Indian pundits, are not unlike, well, professors of Sanskrit. They're really at the mercy of the largesse of the communities in which they live, because there isn't a commercial application for it. It's just the love of the learning that supports it. And I have been generously and wonderfully supported by federal agencies, private donors, et cetera, to do my work. But in India, there was a period of time that I think extends up to nearly to this day, in which people just didn't think that kind of research, that kind of knowledge was important anymore. And so they neglected it and allowed it to just drift away. There's some movement to revive it today, but it's not very effective. And India doesn't have the tradition of private philanthropy to support scholarly activity in the same way that we do in the United States. And we have it more so even than in Europe, for example. How does that parallel with the humanities? I think there are some significant parallels in that people have ceased to value humanistic study because its utility isn't immediately apparent. And the notion that you hear in the discourse about what universities do is almost exclusively focused on the utility of the inquiry that's going on. And this is where where last night this topic came up much less elegantly articulated question. But this is where I said that humanists are really kind of to blame for this in some sense ourselves. My wife is trained as a microbiologist, worked in a lab at Thomas Jefferson Hospital when I was a graduate student, and I was always impressed by the fact that they were working on something incredibly technical and abstruse and incomprehensible to the layman. But if you asked them what they were, as a layman, if you asked them what they were doing, they would say, oh, cancer research. Now, I came away from that conversation reassured and confident, A, that I understood what they were doing, and B, that it was important. And I'm not sure that either of those impressions were right. I know I didn't understand what they were doing, and I have no idea whether what they were doing was important or not, except for the fact that it was validated by peer evaluations and research competitions and so on. You talk to a humanist about what they are doing, and I'm as guilty of this as any of the rest of the humanists in the audience. We tend to immediately get down into the weeds of what it is that we're looking at. And the poor interlocutor who's just asked that question just wanted to know what Sanskrit is. And suddenly I'm talking about Raghunandana Bhattacharya's relationship to the Navya Nyaya tradition. And you can immediately see the curtains come down and you've lost your audience. We don't do a very good job ourselves, and certainly not in training our graduate students, to explain why studying this topic is of any consequence to anybody. And good Lord, it is. And the reason that I'm so confident that the humanities are never going to die is because it is the one topic that is more important to everybody than anything else. That is, who am I and what does my life mean? And that's what humanists engage all the time. We don't have the simple, clean arena of inquiry that one might have in biology or physics, where you can say, does 2 + 2 = 4? Yes, okay, next question. We've got people who are not sure whether or not they even want to talk about 2 things versus 2 other things. It's an incredibly complex arena of investigation. And it's all the more important for us as humanists to give people landmarks to help make sense of what it is that we're doing. So I place the blame for the demise of Sanskrit on the people who didn't understand the value of that tradition, and I place the demise of the humanities' esteem. It used to be much more central at universities than it is now, largely at the feet of those of us who have failed to make the case for them. And I can say that with some confidence because I'm as guilty as you are of that. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Michelle Haley, and I am the EMU board chair, so I oversee this building. And I'm also a presidential candidate, so maybe we'll work together next year. My question is in regards to the Oregon State budget. Obviously, we don't get the majority of our funds from Oregon State, but as we saw with the stimulus package and how that was distributed, it seems like our relationship with the legislatures could be better. And I'm wondering what your ideas or plans for that in the future would be.
I hope this response won't sound too weaselly to you. The truth of the matter is I don't know enough about the nuts and bolts of the issues that you just articulated to have a clear idea. I can tell you this, however, and that is that even though it's only 12.6%, it's still a lot of money. And if it could be 12.7%, that would be better than 12.6. If it could be 25%, that'd even be better. But I'm not very optimistic that one day the people of Oregon are going to get out of bed, and remind yourselves, it's the people of Oregon that are speaking here, not individual legislators. They're simply doing what the people who elected them have asked. That the people of Oregon are going to get out of bed one day and say, you know, we need to go back to the good old days when we were supporting 50% of the operating costs of our universities. I would love for that to happen, but it isn't going to happen. So we've simply got to accept that, recognize it, deal with it, and figure out ways to fund these treasures, because that's what they are, these sacred trusts, to fund them in a way that they will be not only sustained but allowed to flourish. Someone told me, and I have no idea if this is accurate or not, but someone told me that in the state budget there are 6 budget lines for all of K-12 education. And there are 6,000 budget lines for higher education. Now, if that's true, something is awry, because 6,000 budget lines implies that there are 6,000 ways that the state legislature controls the operation of the university. My guess is that they probably don't understand the nuances of the effective administration of this place's resources as well as this community does. And if we could come out of this current downturn with some kind of rationalization of that problem, where we have greater control over our own destiny than apparently is the case now, that would be a huge step in the right direction in my view. Exactly how that's, what the shape of that would be, whether or not Chancellor Pernsteiner thinks that's a good idea or not, he said with some apprehension in his mind, we'll see. But I think that's where we've got to sort of steer ourselves, and how to get there is something that we're all going to have to figure out collectively.
Hi, I'm Steve Mattel, and I'm the Sustainability Director here. We had a chance actually to briefly meet outside of Francis Dyke's office about an hour ago. So I wanted to take a moment or two and describe some of the commitments that our university, nested in our state, both have towards sustainability, just to give you a sense of the level of commitment we have, and then ask a question, if I may. University of Oregon's been long a leader in sustainability, long since before it was called sustainability. We started one of the earliest recycling programs. We have some very robust programs to make sure that our buildings are built in a smart way and with green ideas in mind. More recently, on the faculty side, we have this Big Ideas initiative moving forward, and sustainability is likely to emerge as one of the big ideas. We'll see how that plays out. At the state level, of course, Oregon University system is now engaged in some discussions about how to move sustainability forward across the entire system, and how to better connect it with legislative initiatives as well as the business community. And of course, I could go on and on about all kinds of other examples. So we live in a region that that prides itself on its sustainability leadership, on the example it sets, not only for the state and citizens of the state, but the nation and even beyond. So the question I have really gets to how, could you sort of explain to us a bit how you plan to immerse yourself in that culture that we have long established here in this state, so that you can take a leadership role on behalf of the University of Oregon? And then, if you wouldn't mind venturing a few guesses as to directions you would want to see the University of Oregon go in with regard to its sustainability performance.
Well, thank you. That's a very good question. I have not yet read the policy documents that the system and the university have with regard to sustainability, but I'm familiar with the broad parameters of it. One of the things that most attracts Jan and I about coming to Oregon is that we're not going to be voices crying in the wilderness on this topic any longer. We expect that there will be a lot of people who will be well ahead of us, and a lot of people right beside us in terms of our advocacy for this set of concerns. This isn't a feel-good kind of issue. This isn't something that should just be done because it's the right thing and it's a nice thing and it's cool to be sustainable. We have to do this because shortly after my generation is gone, the consequences for those people who are still on this planet are ominous if we don't do something really fundamental and dramatic. As you well know, there are people who think it's already probably too late. I'd like to think it isn't, and if it isn't, then let's get after it. The problem is that it's going to cost a lot of money, and it's going to require fundamental cultural change, really fundamental cultural change. And money is easier than cultural change. There's a lot of money around, and there isn't much room for cultural change in my experience. And so what we're all going to, this isn't an issue for a president or a chancellor or even a governor. This is an issue for the people of the state of Oregon. And the people of the state of Oregon have to be educated, have to be made to understand that their best interests are served by that cultural change. Exactly how one affects cultural change is a tough question. When people begin to despair about this, I sometimes try to remind them about the possibility for cultural change by drawing a parallel between the daunting nature of changing society to accommodate the innovations that are necessary for us to be a sustainable society, to the daunting challenges that people faced in the 50s and early 60s with regard to civil rights. No one in 1959, no one would ever have dreamed that we would be where we are with regard to civil rights in this country. Now, is bias, prejudice, injustice gone? Of course it's not. But look where we have come in those 50 years. Look at the changes that have happened. Look at the differences in attitude among our children today compared to the children then. It can be done. You can make progress. It's daunting, it's terrifying, it's expensive. It sometimes requires huge sacrifice on the part of individuals and whole collections of individuals, but it can be done if the desire is there. And my question right back to you is the desire here in this community? Is this community ready to engage in the kind of fundamental change that this community is necessary, even on a smaller scale, to have a wholly different design to buildings, to change the way we use automobiles, to change the way we accommodate automobiles, to change the way we use paper, water, heat, cooling, light sources. It's an incredibly pervasive challenge, and one that a president is not going to solve by signing the appropriate document and waving the flag out the window and saying we are going to be sustainable. This is something that has to be done by the entire community. One of the things I'm interested in is to see what kind of resolve there is here to actually effect even modest change in the near term. Yes, ma'am, in the back.
Hi, I'm Cynthia McIntosh. We met yesterday. I'm a budget analyst in budget and resource planning. And a group of us were just talking and kind of came up with a collective question. So forgive me if I have to read this, but I've got to represent everyone here. So we have a current student population of just over 21,000. And we know in these times of financial crisis, one of the easiest ways to increase our revenues is to simply admit more students. And so we'd be interested in hearing from you, so if we accepted all qualified applicants, how would you define qualified applicants? What would be the ideal student population for the U of O? And what kind of steps would this university have to take in order to accept all qualified applicants?
Well, for me, when I say all qualified applicants, the test is whether or not a student has the capacity to succeed at an institution. One of the challenges that I'm currently confronting at the University of Kansas is that admissions criteria are set by the legislature. And I won't go into the details. There are basically three criteria. None of them reach a level that indicate that a student has mastered anything adequate to succeed at the University of Kansas. Now, those are the minima, of course. The student body at the University of Kansas has a profile remarkably similar to this one. But every single year, because of this statute, we are forced to admit a significant number of students whom we know in advance. We know from the time they have submitted their applications they will not succeed here. They don't have the math, they don't have the writing ability, they don't have the maturity levels. And admissions people have pretty sophisticated tools to identify these things. We have no choice but to admit that student, and I think that's immoral, frankly. What we are doing is we're saying to that student, sure, come here, pay $18,000, and at the end of this semester or two, we'll stamp an F on your forehead and you get to wear that badge for the rest of your life. You get to make up for the fact that you failed at the University of Kansas. It's silly, it's wrong, it's just awful. So success is the capacity for success is the criterion, not grade point averages, test scores, et cetera, but does this kid have the preparation, the character, the maturity to succeed at this institution? How big should the university be? I don't know. It's probably going to be bigger than it is now, just looking at the dynamics of the marketplace, the demography of the region, et cetera, what's happening in California and Washington. But exactly how big it should be, I can't tell you that. I don't know the answer to that yet. What I can tell you is that I have a lot of experience with the consequences on a university's quality of education when you just measure, when you allow only revenue issues to determine the size of your student body. I've been at a place that was like a bad dieter, just couldn't stop nibbling until 48,000 was passed, and then 49,000 was passed, and what the hell, 50,000, okay, we can manage with 50,000. And we hit 51,000, and we're on our way to go to 52, and everybody just threw up their hands and said, this is not possible, we can't do this. We pointed to all kinds of manifestations of what one of my creative colleagues called Malthusian pressure. You couldn't walk down the street, it was too jammed. The dormitories were overflowing, the unions were full. But the real issue was what was happening in the classroom, and no one wanted to talk about that publicly. And I'm not going to hear either, but I'll tell you there were consequences. And we cannot allow that to happen here. Now, we might be a university of 24,000, 25,000 students one day. But my sincere hope is that if we are, that we have the faculty, we have the curricula, we have the opportunities, internships, ancillary educational opportunities, dormitory space, and other services to sustain that number. Just adding a couple thousand extra bodies because it generates X amount of revenue is a very short-sighted solution.
Lisa Minotti, the Director of Development for the libraries on campus. Over the past 15 years that I've been here, there's been a lot of talk about becoming one of the top public institutions in the country, the top 25, the top tier, however you might define it. So how would you propose to, one, set and achieve that goal while increasing or improving the quality of the undergraduate education, especially in light of the economic times we're in?
We spend a lot of time talking about rankings. I'm as guilty as the rest of you in invoking rankings as a metric of our success, and usually talking about being in the number one public university in America, or the top 10, in the top 10 or the top 25 or whatever it might be. Is just a placeholder for concern about making the place better. You're already in the top 32 public universities in the United States by virtue of your membership in the AAU, by a set of metrics that are really significant for us professionally. So being in the top 25, we might already be there. I don't know. What criteria would you use? Being in the top 10, we might already be there. And certainly, in some fields, we're the best, by far. And in many, many fields, we're in the top 5 by almost any metric. These kinds of conversations are rhetoric, frankly. They're important rhetoric because for some people, this is the only way they understand that progress is being made. That's why those damned rankings in U.S. News and World Report and the Wall Street Journal and so on are important, because alums throughout the world look at that and say, let's see, where is the University of Oregon? Oh, they slipped 2 points this year. They were up 1 point last year. What happened? Well, I can tell you what happened. What happened was Newsweek fiddled around with the metrics so that the rankings would be different, so you'd buy another copy of that magazine. I don't like to be driven by those kinds of considerations. I'm much more interested in what does the library need to better fulfill its mission of sustaining the research and teaching that we're responsible for here. That's a really interesting question for me. Whether you're ranked 9th or 10th or 1st or 31st is pretty marginal concern to me. It's, do the people in this room who need your services, are they getting what they need? Are they getting them in a timely fashion? Is it effective? Can we sustain it in this environment? If we can't, what are we going to do about that? How are we going to do things differently? Those questions, I'd rather engage my what limited talent I have in addressing those rather than this kind of vague stuff about we're number one. That's okay for athletes, but not for academics. Yes, in the back, and then in the front here.
Hi, I'm Daniel Falk, head of religious studies, and I was the one who asked the humanities question yesterday, and I would like to follow up on the one.
Yeah, but you didn't have the good sense to claim that you'd read my work, you see. So.
I'd like to follow up on that and also the question today. I'd like to thank you for taking seriously that question, and also I agree with what you're saying in terms of the responsibility of people to be able to communicate. I would like to push a bit further and on that though, and take a little issue though. One, I think you to some degree missed the point of both of those questions in terms of, you answered them in terms of the decline of humanities in general, which wasn't actually the point. It's the loss of respect of humanities in terms of research and moving more towards them as service departments. And that is, I think, an issue. In terms of the scholars being able to communicate, that the responsibility is on us, and I think that is a very important point. But I don't think that that's the whole issue. I can speak to my particular area, which is Dead Sea Scrolls, which does actually very well at communicating. I don't think the problem is between the scholars and the public.
It's between the scholars.
What's that?
It's between the scholars in your field.
Well, yes, but in museum after museum around the world, they have broken records in terms of lectures, packing out lecture halls. People flock to it. I do find, though, a big gap between the university's expectation of how this can be sold to the public. And I think that there is responsibility on the university as an institution to take seriously what they have in terms of their faculty and being able to sell it to the general public. Actually, when the scholars go out there and speak to the public themselves, they do remarkably well and communicate very well and generate a ton of excitement. But I'm not sure the university does a particularly good job at both selling their scholars in the humanities to fundraisers and to the general public in terms of media attention and so on. And I think a lot more can be done on there. So I wanted to kick that back to you in terms of your leadership of the university. How can you be an advocate for, and this applies not just to the humanities, but to other areas as well, in terms of being able to sell the faculty, the whole body, not just the parts which are often perceived as easy to sell to the public. I think there's a lot more that can be sold to the public than is often taken for granted. So I think there is an expectation problem as well in terms of how well this will be received by potential donors and so on.
Well, I take your point, and I think that's probably right. It's probably right in the sense that it's often the case that it's easier to show the glitzy research tool, some kind of exotic electron microscope or MRI machine or whatever that just oozes a sense of science and importance and so on. And I just had one of these experiences. I went into the Loke laboratory and saw someone using X-rays to measure the valence, the bonds on chemical bonds on a surface of something that he was examining. And we all left the room thinking, boy, that was really neat. And none of us had a clue what the hell the guy was doing. Not the remotest clue. Showed graphs and everything, but we didn't know what he was doing. But you get this sense that somehow, and this is also part of the Dead Sea Scrolls, by the way, is that you can say, look at these old documents. Aren't they really cool? And everybody says, yes, that is really important and cool. But they don't have a clue why you value them. This is just in the nature of scientific inquiry among scientists versus the lay public. I think that to some extent you've put your finger on a legitimate concern. It's easy to put a price tag on a piece of equipment that a scientist may need in a biology lab or a physics lab. It's much more difficult to put a price tag on what you need to do your work. You can say, I need to make a trip to Jerusalem, or I need to go to a conference to vet these ideas. But that's not anywhere near as concrete and palpable as that shiny chrome object that's much more expensive, and therefore it must be more important, which is another issue that we often deal with. I think that you're right, that universities in general, I would hope not me, given the fact that I'm a Sanskritist, but in general I think it is the case that we do fall back on this notion that we can dazzle them with this toy and nobody's going to ask us any questions that are too hard. Anytime, one of the tests for me of the willing ignorance of the populace is the way news media people talk about math and science. They will talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls because they think they know something about the Dead Sea Scrolls that had to do with Jesus and other things. But someone will put up a relatively simple mathematical formula in the course of explaining their work, and Buffy and Billy, the news anchors, will say, oh, Buffy, wasn't that something? I flunked third grade math. I could never understand that. Ha, ha, ha. Those people really are smart. But they don't respond in the same way to people when we have a story about the Dead Sea Scrolls, or much more rarely Sanskrit, etc. They think they know about that. And the reason they think they know about that is because at some human personal level, they're responding to what it is that we're engaged in. And that is why I'm absolutely confident that the humanities will never pass from a legitimate and important place at universities like this one. But in the meantime, as you put it, selling that idea is something that we have to figure better ways of doing, and not be embarrassed by the fact that it's going to take 2 or 3 more minutes to explain why this area of research is as important as the shiny object. Now, lest I give the impression that I don't like shiny objects, I will tell you that I have spent more of my time, way more of my time, both on the development side and just in terms of administrative bandwidth, and figuring out how to pay for big science, because it's incredibly expensive. And this is a daunting challenge that that universities like this face. I will tell you, I am thrilled with the research infrastructure that I've seen so far. It's really impressive. You sure wouldn't know that you'd been on a bread and water diet when you're looking at the tools that you've made available to your folks here. It's very impressive. Yes, sir.
My name is Eric Talbert. I'm an adjunct instructor here. I'm also an alum. My question is about athletic spending, and I'm sure you've talked about this to some extent, although I haven't kept up, so I apologize. But I heard a soundbite on the news where you said that the key is to strike a balance between athletics and academics. I agree with that. I think the point of contention is where's the balance? So my question is, do you think the University of Oregon as an institution does have that balance between athletic and academic spending? And could you compare that to an institution that you think maybe does not?
Yes and yes. I do think that the University of Oregon has struck more or less a balance, and yes, I can compare it to a place that has not. Spent a long time at a place that has not. Spent 24 years at a place that has a $190 million a year athletics budget. You know, the arena has generated an enormous amount of controversy, and it did so in the context of the Workers' Rights Committee issue, et cetera, et cetera. These things happen at institutions from time to time. One can do a postmortem on what happened and what might have been done differently, et cetera, and I hope has been done, because that's the only way you learn from these things. But at the end of the day, remember that this arena is a sort of once-in-a-century expenditure. Mac Court is a charming place. I've never been in it, but I've seen it on TV. The University of Oregon needs a better facility than that one. I'm not sure how safe that building must be. Apparently, the interior is completely wood. So, you know, there's public safety issues, et cetera. Anytime you build a facility like this, it's going to skew things dramatically, because there's a huge outlay of revenues for that facility. But it's my understanding that this athletics program is completely self-sustaining. There are not very many big league athletics programs that can make that claim. Relatively few, in fact. The fact that they are able to sustain themselves is liberating and terrific. I have a very good friend who, well, I better not say, who went to a really important public university in a really big state that's currently having lots of financial difficulties. Might even be the best university in that state, but I'm not going to tell you anymore. And he told me that he was appalled when he became the leader of that institution to discover that $8 million of general revenue funds were used to subsidize athletics. And he vowed he was going to fix that. And at the end of his term as the leader of that institution, they were spending $13 million. The pressure from alumni, the pressure to perform, the pressure to be competitive, et cetera, is really strong at places like this. And when you're in a situation where the programs sustain themselves and remain competitive, you've really got something. That's a real testimony to the administration.
May I follow on
Sure,
that?
of course.
So I get that. I guess some people would argue that we've exceeded sustainability and that, in fact, the athletics shouldn't be autonomous and maybe some of that money should go back into academics. What's your opinion on that?
I think that's a legitimate concern, and it requires constant institutional control to ever get to that stage. What I often say about athletics at public universities is that they're really important because they buy mind share. They buy concern on the part of that person who doesn't give a damn what you or I do here, but they feel passionately about the Ducks. And when the Ducks win, they're happy. When the Ducks lose, they're unhappy. And go Oregon. That's a great thing. That person's never going to care about Sanskrit, probably. Well, maybe, if they talk to me long enough. But their enthusiasm and concern about the institution is there in some measure in a way that it would never be otherwise. And that's a really valuable thing for a public university. But you can throw that away in a heartbeat if it turns out that you're corrupt, that you're cheating, or that your value system is so skewed that you haven't graduated a student since the Eisenhower administration. And this program, as far as I know so far, is remarkable. This program graduated 17 of 19 seniors from the football team last year. That's better than the institution does with the freshman class. That's something to be quite proud of. And if you can win a game or two in the bargain, that's terrific. All right, one last question.
Hi, I was just wondering what kind of ways that you have worked with students in the past and how you plan on working with students in the future here at the U of O.
As Dean of the College of Liberal Arts at the University of Texas, a small enterprise of 14,000 students with 600 faculty and a $300 million endowment, I worked pretty hard to establish regular lines of communication with students. And since you're here to find out about me and you've already asked me to talk about myself, I'm going to boast for a minute. I got 3 prizes from students as a dean that really were pretty important. One of them was the Eyes of Texas that is rarely given to a faculty member. It's a sort of secret organization where they go to great lengths to embarrass you for a moment and then reveal that they've given you this great honor. And I got that twice in the course of my career. Pretty important for me. Communication between students and someone in a position like a president doesn't happen absolutely naturally. The nature of one's schedule, the demands on one's time, it would be easy to let that just slip. And I don't want that to happen. We're here because of students. I'm here because of the research and teaching that goes on. It's not the other way around. The entire enterprise is here because of the research and the teaching that takes place here. All the other stuff, including athletics, including the union, including all of the services, are here to make possible that teaching and research. And when the BS gets about knee-deep in my office, I always walk out onto the campus and try and find some student to talk to sort of recalibrate things. And it's my intention to take advantage of this robust student organization that you've got here and to find other ways to talk to people who are, to students who are not part of that organization, but part of other organizations on the campus as well. I can't tell you exactly how I will do that, but I can promise you that I'll do it. Absolutely last question. The question is, will there eventually be a class in Sanskrit? I'm teaching Sanskrit this semester. And in an environment where I've been engaged in this process, the chancellor at the University of Kansas has announced that he's stepping down. The governor has left the state, and our fate is in the balance with the legislature. You can imagine what a wonderful teacher I am this semester. And it's been torture. I've luckily got a dozen wonderful, highly motivated students who have more patience than their parents could ever understand. So it's been great fun, but it's sure going to be, it'll be hard to do in the next couple of years. Well, I just want to thank you all for your time. I know how hard it is to carve this much time out of the middle of a day, particularly when the sun is shining outside, and tell you how wildly enthusiastic I am about this prospect. This is really a great place, really a great place. Thank you.